I saw many women paying what I call a success tax. And this is where we sacrifice our physical health, our mental well-being, our personal relationships, or the trifecta, which is all three, in the pursuit of success. That's not how we are designed.
All those things you just mentioned are literally things that only affect women.
The super skill that trumps our IQ and our EQ in the 21st century is our FQ. The average Australian adult will spend a whopping 17 years of their entire life on their phone.
And we do know that if people cook their dopamine, it leads to things like depression, anxiety.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. I'm just so grateful to be having this conversation with you right now.
Thank you.
Because people need to hear your story, and you are the real deal, like honestly, and you're so brave. On this episode of Next Season, I speak with Dr. Kristy Goodwin, who is a neuroscientist, amongst other things. This episode is so value-packed, full of lessons and insights to help women live the most powered-up version of themselves. Warning, it does get a little bit emotional, but I can tell you right now, it's going to have a massive, massive impact on you. Welcome to Next Season, Dr. Kristy Goodwin.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. I think sometimes the best way to jump into the self-bio is for you to discuss what are all the hats that you wear in everyday life?
Yes. Someone said to me the other day, gosh, you're busy. And I cringed when I heard that word. I'm not busy. I often say I have full hands, a full heart and a full calendar. So I do have a lot of hats and probably am busy, but I'm busy for all the right reasons. So first and foremost, I am a mum. I've got 3 sons ranging in age from 14 down to 6. We've also got a male dog and a husband. And the dog came before the husband, then I just noticed. I run my own business. We live on the northern beaches of Sydney. And yes, I have a very, as I said, full calendar, but I love what I do and love doing it with the people that I choose to spend life with.
Yeah, my kind of woman, this is exactly how I feel as well. And actually, I was at one of Jack's events this week and he said that when people say they're busy, it's generally that they're not busy, but they're overwhelmed.
Yes.
But for some people, like the overwhelm is invited, right? Because it's like you just want to get as much as you can get done and have as big as impact as you can have as well. And as a woman who's obviously ambitious and very passionate about helping other women, I want to ask you about the work that you do in helping power up women.
For many years, worked with a lot of women at the end of a keynote, in some coaching work, and I kept seeing this common denominator, a lot of incredibly ambitious, accomplished women who were like the duck phenomenon. On the surface, they looked like, from an optics perspective, they were hitting all the targets, all the traditional success metrics. They achieved the accolades at work, the promotions, they had the kids, they had the house, but below the surface, women were really suffering in silence. Women who were questioning their ability, who were living what I call stressed, exhausted and distracted all of the time. And I started to realise that many women were living what I call as low-res, powered-down versions of themselves. And I read a book several years ago that really changed how I looked at my entire life. It's a book, I don't know if you've read it, called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And it is a great book that reminds us that as humans, if we are lucky, if we are one of the lucky ones who get to look after our health and well-being, we have an average of 4,000 weeks in our entire lifetime. That means, this is a really confronting, sobering statistic, we get 4,000 Sundays in our entire life, if we're lucky. And I looked around at all of these incredible women who weren't making the most of those 4,000 Sundays. They'd creep to the finish line, often not even by Friday if they were lucky, and they were living this pixelated version of their potential. And I realised that I was having all of these, backstage conversations with women, and we needed to bring this to the surface. We needed to stop women suffering. We needed women to live the most of these precious 4,000 weeks that we're all gifted.
Yeah, now that you say that, I do remember buying the 4K calendar where you put in the date and the age that you are, and then it fills out, it basically blanks out all of the, weeks that are already gone in your life. And I guess
Have you done it?
Yes, I did it. I bought it. And at the time, I bought it and put it in my office actually. And my team were like, this is actually really scary and it gives me anxiety because it's actually quite morbid seeing your time in that way basically dissipating right before your eyes. But I have been someone who is always very motivated by knowing that we're not here forever. It doesn't need to be a morbid thing. It can be something that actually empowers you to actually make the most of everything. But yeah, I can relate to, the stories you tell of those women at one point I was around 35, and I've shared this before, but I did feel completely disconnected to myself because I felt like, I was the performer. I had all of these things going on in my life, and they were very distracting and were very busy, but I wasn't actually connected with myself in terms of knowing, like, were these the things that I really cared about or valued or that really lit me up at the time. And I've been going through so much change since then, and there's been like a whole recalibration process, which we'll definitely dive into that topic some more in a minute. But I want to talk to you about the term that you've coined, success tax, and what that means for women.
Yeah, so again, the work that I've done, and obviously, conversations with girlfriends, family members, I saw many women paying what I call a success tax. And this is where we sacrifice our physical health, our mental well-being, our personal relationships, or the trifecta, which is all three, in the pursuit of success. And I think many of us, and I've been there, I'm happy to share in a moment how I almost paid what I call the ultimate success tax, because I think many of us are living and working in ways that are completely incompatible with how we are neurobiologically designed. I often say as humans, unfortunately, we have some biological constraints that we can't outperform. There are some, parts of our brain and our biology that limit at what we can accomplish and do. And I think many of us are living in frantic, frenetic and frazzled ways. That's not how we are designed. I often call our brain, as a neuroscientist, I'm obsessed with our brains. I call our brains our human operating system, our HOS. And the reality is we cannot outperform our HOS. But I see many women trying to outperform their HOS, and that's where they pay that success tax.
And what does that look like? How does it show up?
It's that low-res, powered-down version. So women who are constantly stressed, exhausted, burnt out, distracted. Women who often are experiencing a myriad of mental health issues. I think it's a congregation of a whole lot of factors. Often I refer to it as almost like a stress superstorm. It's the collision of all these factors, and often happens at around a significant milestone in a person's life. We often see heightened stress colliding with increasing work demands, with parental demands, with hormonal changes if they're approaching motherhood or perimenopause or menopause. And so we are seeing this collision happening, and this is why many women are living as those low-res, powered-down versions of themselves.
And all those things you just mentioned are literally things that only affect women, which makes it so difficult in relationships because men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and we've got these things that we obviously need to navigate. And we need, obviously, the support of our partners to understand this. But there isn't really enough information out there.
Just at a really rudimentary level, the way that males and females physiologically process stress is vastly different. It is a really huge dichotomy between how we exist. And so, again, not making excuses for men, but often it's more challenging for them to understand or appreciate because they've never had that lived experience themselves of dealing with fluctuating hormones, feeling with often what's referred to as the mental load, often the invisible caring and domestic responsibility that come with being a female, regardless of whether you have children or not. We also know now what's coming with that is the increased digital load. Researchers are calling it the double digital burden. And it's this idea that females are absorbing the extra digital load. We get the email with the bill and then the SMS saying that our account's going to be debited. We're in the family WhatsApp group organising grandma's 90th birthday present. We are the default parent on the WhatsApp group or on the childcare, phone list. And so it's these factors that are, as I said before, bespoke, unique to women. And for many women, they are suffering in silence. And so I became frustrated, if I'm really honest. I was sick of seeing these really fabulous women living lives that weren't compatible with how they're designed. So that's, I guess, where my work stemmed from.
Absolutely loathe life admin, and most of those things that you mentioned fall into that category. But, it's just, by default, it kind of becomes our role to manage those things. But for me personally, I find most of those things to be the most draining. They're the things that just zap the energy out of me. And they're the things I get stuck with, rather than wanting to actually focus on, doing deep work towards like a project that I'm really passionate about. I often find myself distracted in life admin, tidying up things around the house, as my friend Kaya Walling would say, the shits and bits.
I love that.
We're going to have her on the show later on to help speak to that particular topic. at length. But yeah, I mean, it falls under the umbrella of, this overwhelm, the mental load, the distractions. I actually put some content out recently about how many interruptions women have on a typical day. But I wanted to know specifically for high functioning women who are either career or, entrepreneurial driven, how many interruptions a day on average were they receiving? And I did some research through ChatGPT. And it did actually, bring the sources out. So this is actually factually correct. But it said on average, it'd be about 300 interruptions a day, in the workforce. We talk about one distraction taking someone 20 minutes to course correct to get back on task.
They've studied that. That's called the resumption lag. And it's this idea that has been quantified and studied that regardless of how we're distracted, and there's 3 types of distractions. Digital, obviously the most, disturbing one. People are distracting. Sometimes if you are trying to work from home and your children come up and interrupt you, or, the noisy office worker that saddles up to your desk at the most inopportune time for a quick chat. And our thoughts can be distracting. And regardless of how we're distracted, it takes an average adult, as you said, 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back into that deep focus state. So imagine what that's costing us if we are being interrupted over 300 times a day. And so that's why I often talk to women about one of the super skills. In fact, I believe it's the super skill of the 21st century for every human. It's not our IQ. In more recent years, we were told it was our EQ, our emotional intelligence. The super skill that trumps our IQ and our EQ in the 21st century is our FQ. Your focus quotient, your capacity to orient, control, and direct your attention in a world that has been deliberately designed to be distracting and disruptive is a super skill. And so this is I have something called the flourishing framework, and it's all about how do we get all people, but particularly high-performing women, to flourish in the digitally demanding world that we all now live and work in. And that central pillar is how do we optimize our focus? How do we build a fortress around our focus? Not all day. We all have something called a power zone set of hours, and that's biologically determined. We have something in our body, it's called our PER3 gene, and it biologically dictates when we're most focused and alert. We fall into one of 3 categories. I wonder what you are. We're either the early birds, the lions, and so we power on all cylinders early in the morning. And then we've got the bears in the middle of the day, sort of the 10 to 3 p.m. time slot suits them. And then we've got some wolves, and wolves are the night owls. They're the annoying people sending you emails at 11 o'clock at night. They ask you over for dinner at 9 o'clock. And so your chronotype dictates when you're most focused and alert. If you can block out even just an hour, a 2 hour, and build a fortress around your focus during your chronotype's peak performance zone, you will get far more work done in that time than any other time in the day. So there are things that we can do. Do you think you know which your chronotype?
I'm the panda bear.
You're the panda, of course you are. They're
literally, but I don't know if that's because it is the best time for me to be doing work, or it's the time I've had to accept is the best time for me to do work, because mornings are pretty hectic. I'm up with Ari anywhere from sort of 6 to 6:30. By the time I get her to daycare or we have a nanny come and take over, it's around 8 or 8:30. Then by the time I can actually get into the rhythm of it, have breakfast and switch gears, it might be 9 before I start working. And then by 10, I kind of wake up and really get into it. But then once we get into sort of the afternoon, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, that slump comes through again energetically, and then I'm not much good later on in the day. So
I'll send you a link. There's a quiz that you can do.
That'd be great. Send me the link, and we can put the link out for everyone else to do.
Figure out your chronotype. But that 2 to 4 p.m. slump, I also want to point out, very common, and often very common in women for similar reasons. Either they're not getting the right volume or timing of their sleep because they're interrupted by motherhood duties. But the other reason can be, and this is something really interesting we've only discovered in recent years, is that many of us wake up and reach for the coffee, that caffeinated drink first thing in the morning. Amanda's looking guilty. Now, just hear me out behind the science before you dismiss this one. You're looking very nervously at me. I'm not saying no caffeine. I'm just putting that out there because people are turning off the podcast. But if we drink a caffeinated beverage within the first 60 to 90 minutes of waking up, what happens is 2 things. One is we should naturally see a spike in cortisol in the morning. That's actually what helps us wake up. If we add in the extra cortisol we get from our caffeine, we already have a huge hit of cortisol. So we're in this elevated stress state, and sometimes our feet haven't even hit the floor. The second thing that happens is that the caffeine blocks something something in our brain called adenosine. And adenosine is a molecule that should build up in our brain as the day progresses. So adenosine is what makes us yawn at night. It's what makes us sleepy. So when we wake up, there's still a small residual amount that's left over. Caffeine blocks our adenosine receptors. I haven't had my caffeine fix
I know, you've
yet.
got some big words here. You're doing well.
But that caffeine stops the adenosine, from, the residual amount from being depleted, and then it builds up in the day, and guess when it hits us? Between 2 and 4 p.m. And so that's why many of us, I call it biscuit o'clock, 2 o'clock, you're frantically looking for the carbs or the coffee. This is why many women in particular experience that slump. Add in the fact that we often aren't getting the right quality or quantity of sleep, and it's almost like this recipe for this perpetual exhaustion that I see so many high-performing women battling every day.
Sleep is a huge thing. It's something Jack and I are very passionate about because we understand how much it impacts our performance. We both wear Oura rings.
Yeah.
I've got one as well.
I do, and a
most
whip strap.
Most people that I connect with these days wear Oura rings as well.
Yeah.
One big thing I've noticed since becoming a mother is the lack of deep sleep and REM sleep that I get. I sleep very lightly, and I think that's because you go to sleep with like the one ear open on the monitor and you hear every little, noise.
That your partner doesn't?
No, I mean like biologically we're the ones wired to wake up to all of those sorts of things, which is great because you want to be able to as well. Like I would hate to be a deep sleeper and not be able to wake up to her in the middle of the night when she needs me. But I do notice a huge difference in my mood, whether or not I get that deep sleep or that REM sleep. And there's been some days recently where I've literally had to put myself down for a nap during the day to try and get some because if I've had a few days where I've been losing deep or REM sleep, I know I'm just going to get worse and it affects my performance. Like I end up feeling depressed. And when I'm depressed, I have zero motivation to do anything. And then it becomes this whole self-loathing thing where I hate myself because I'm not moving forward in all of the things that, I want to be achieving. And it's just like this vicious cycle. So naps has been something that I'm trying to obviously build into my schedule when that happens. But for the most part, and from all of the conversations I have with other mums, it's like this is just kind of a part of life now. It's something that we need to sort of live with.
Can I applaud you? Because, honestly, and this is why I'm a huge advocate of wearables. I use Oura rings and Whoop straps with the coaching clients I work with and corporate teams because you can't argue. Your body keeps score. You can't argue with your own biometric data. And many of us try and outperform our biological blueprint and we can't. And I think what you described there is that huge fluctuation in our mood when we haven't had good sleep. Women are the emotional thermostat in their families. And so we've all seen that contagion effect. When we're having a crappy afternoon, the shit hits the fan and everybody's mood cascades accordingly. Sleep, it is the absolute bedrock of performance and well-being. Yet many women, the research is constantly telling us, women need an average of 20 minutes more sleep than men per night for a whole lot of biological hormonal reasons, and many of us aren't even getting the minimum. Now, a lot of us feel guilty about this, and there's some really fascinating new research that tells us that whilst we still need to get good amount of sleep, one of the best predictors of sleep's impact on our all-cause mortality is having consistent sleep and wake times. So if you can fall asleep and wake up within 30 minutes of usual time, we think that might be even more important than the volume of sleep that you're getting. So I think that gives us some permission not to stress over sleep. The other thing, and I love that you nap, but have you ever tried something, and a lot of my female clients love this, have you ever given something called non-sleep deep rest a go?
No.
Do you want to know what it is?
Yes.
So the problem with naps, I love naps, but the problem with a nap is if you do it for too long or too late in the day, it impacts your sleep that night. We've all done it, fallen asleep in the sun on the couch on a Saturday afternoon. Our sleep's ruined Saturday night and Sunday sometimes. And a nap usually need at least 20 to 90 minutes. Non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, it's been popularised by Andrew Huberman, and it's basically an ancient practice called Yoga Nidra. Now, non-sleep deep rest, you can do it sitting up or you can do it laying down, and it's a progressive muscle relaxation, and it's what we call pseudo sleep. So it's like a fake sleep. But what happens is you get a huge increase in something called striatal dopamine, and the good news is you only need 10 minutes. So it's an audio you can listen to, and there's free ones online. I'm happy to share them so you can pop them in the show notes. But 10 minutes sitting up or laying down, and you get a huge hit in this striatal dopamine that makes you feel like you have had a nap or a sleep. Your focus, your mood, your productivity goes through the roof. And I see so many women who I work with who wear these wearables and show a huge improvement or a decline in their stress and in their recovery just by 10 minutes of NSDR.
That's amazing.
It's a game changer.
And I'm wondering, is this an alternative to like meditation? Because, you know, like some of us really struggle with meditation.
Yeah.
How does it differ from meditation?
Very similar.
Okay.
Very similar. Yep. So mimics the sort of rest states of the brain. Yep. We get similar relaxation modes in our brain. But as I said, 10 minutes is all that we require. Because it's a progressive muscle relaxation, we get some physiological benefits as well as obviously the mental benefits.
Yep.
And again, because we can do it sitting up, like a lot of people hear a nap, and unless you're working remotely or you've got somewhere discreetly in the office, you know, just many of us don't do the nap. And unlike a nap, an SDR can be done any time of the day or night. And for many of the women I work with, I know insomnia is a huge problem, either falling asleep or staying asleep. NSDR can be performed when you wake up. You know, when you have that racing thought at 2 a.m. and you just can't fall back asleep, it's often the to-do list that's playing on repeat. NSDR is a great practice that you can use to help you fall back asleep.
Oh, I'm taking
Give it a go.
This is happening.
Take it for a test.
Because I really struggle to fall asleep. My mind wants to create the minute I hit the pillow of an evening. It comes up with all of my best ideas. It gets so excited and it's like, and then like Jack will be like, I can hear him falling asleep next to me, and I'm like, oh gosh. But you know, we're really like consistent with our bedtime. Like we're normally always down between sort of 8:30 and 9 o'clock every night. But I used to stay up a bit later than that and get up a little bit earlier, you know, before becoming a mother. But yeah, obviously I want to get to bed earlier because I get woken up earlier nowadays as well. Yep. This is something I definitely am very keen to look into. I want to park the D word for later on as well, dopamine, because you mentioned that it improves dopamine, but there's so many things that are destroying dopamine. I think that's another thing that's actually working against women who want to be powered up versions of themselves. So we'll come back to that in a second. I would like to ask you, like obviously you work with a lot of other women and helping them with their struggles, but what have been some of your internal struggles that you've dealt with?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to share. The reason I'm really passionate about this, and I mentioned it before, I almost paid the ultimate success tax. At the height of the pandemic, like many people, I contracted COVID, you know, at the early stages when everyone was fighting over toilet paper, so very early on. And I expected it to be a really minor thing. You know, I was a fit, vaccinated woman. Yeah. If I'm honest, I had plans of binge watching Netflix in bed and having my husband deliver me chicken soup. Neither thing took place, but a girl can dream. And so I honestly thought it'd be a blip on the radar. What I didn't expect was that I would have uncontrollable seizures alongside COVID. Early one morning, our Great Dane Tommy found me on the floor next to our bed. Thankfully, he alerted my husband. I was having yet another seizure and I was rushed to a code red emergency ward and hooked up to a ventilator, unable to breathe. I lay there in that hospital bed, and after extensive cardiac and neurological testing, the only medical explanation the experts could come up with as to why I was so sick and having the seizures alongside COVID was that I was burnt out. For years, we hear the whispers from our body, slow down, work in a more sustainable pace, and, release the pressure valve. But I ignored those whispers until my body had to shout. For years, I'd adopted, do you remember the Codral advice of the 1980s? Soldier on. There was a marketing campaign that'll get stuck in your head today. Thank you. And I see so many people, females and males, who adopt that, that hustle, grind, push culture, and that is completely incompatible with our human operating system. And I lay there in that code red emergency ward, and there was a paper petition curtain separating myself and the female next to me. I heard that female calling out for her daughters. I heard her struggling to breathe. I heard that woman take the very last breath of her life. I heard the doctors pronouncing her time of death and lamenting the fact that her daughters never made it there on time. And I lay there in that bed. I lay there in that bed. And I thought, was this going to happen to me too? The ventilator was humming and I lay there and I started thinking about really random things. Did my husband know the Netflix login? Did he know the password to get the kids' lunch order app? Would I make it home to him? And I realised I had kept pushing and pushing till my physical health was shot. My mental well-being wasn't in a great space, and I'd really pushed important relationships out of the way because, it was the height of the pandemic. I was a speaker, so my world imploded. I didn't like the word pivot, so I called it a digital pirouette because it sounded more graceful than what it was. But the reality was I was trying to resurrect a speaking business, doing keynotes from the kitchen table. My husband had conveniently been deemed an essential worker, so he'd go off to work every day, and I was tasked with the impossible job of homeschooling 3 boys and trying to resurrect my business at home alone. And so years and years of chronic stress caught up with me. And it was through sharing this story when I was eventually brave enough to share it. And I will say, I lay there in that hospital bed, and when you're forced to confront your own possible mortality, you strip away all the superfluous things in your life. and you start to recalibrate your values, your priorities. You start to prioritize the potent things. And I lay there in that bed and I made a promise to myself that if I was one of the lucky ones to walk out of that code red ward, I would start living and working in ways that were compatible with my human operating system. And that's what I did. And it turned my life around. I've managed to achieve success with 3 kids and, you know, that full calendar that I mentioned at the beginning, but without feeling the chronic stress, exhaustion and distraction that once caused me to live as that low-res version of myself. And so when I started sharing my story, it was the women that would email me afterwards, after the keynote, or find me in the foyer afterwards and say, I'm you, I need help. And I realised I wasn't willing to stand by and let a generation of women live this depleted, distracted life that we're living. And so that, lit a fire in.
Man, I am just so grateful to be having this conversation with you right now, because more people need to hear your story, and you are the real deal, like, honestly, and you're so brave.
Sorry.
I just want to take a moment to just honour you and what you've gone through and what you've chosen to do with it.
Thank you. Do you know what? I didn't share the story for 18 months after I came out of that code red ward. I was so embarrassed. You know, I'm a neuroscientist. I coach people who are burnt out. But one of the problems, and I say this not to take myself off the hook, but because so many women come to me, but the problem with burnout is that your body often no longer produces cortisol. Your adrenals are so depleted that your body's not producing the cortisol, so you don't actually feel stressed. If you asked me at the height of the pandemic with the kids on the kitchen table, me trying to do a keynote, was I stressed? I would have said no. And I think the frog in boiling water that I see so many of us, you know, our nervous systems are completely dysregulated. Right. And we look around at our peers and you ask anyone how they are, and usually their first response today is busy, you know, or exhausted, busy or burnt out, the two Bs.
Which, as I said earlier, was also just code for overwhelmed, really.
Yeah, I hid it for a while and kept going on. And then when I finally thought, I'm going to be brave enough to share this, I've never been more inundated, and I started to slowly share things on social media, and it went crazy because for so long women have, as I said, suffered in silence. Of those 4,000 weeks, we can't squander them like living as, you know, a half-baked version of ourselves.
Yeah, you're the second person I've spoken to in a week that has shared a similar story about being faced with their own mortality and how much that has motivated them to create change and prioritize what's most important in life, which always starts with family. You know, it's always about, I want to be more present with my family. I want to spend more, you know, intentional present time with my partner, because, as you said, you know, the woman next to you who was waiting for her, you know, daughters to come in. I mean, it's the people that you yearn for in those moments that we often take for granted, that we're replacing with trivial things, whether it be in our, you know, calendars or being on our phones or... it's kind of sad that it has to come to that sort of point, you know, like for something so awful to happen to get that reality check, right? And I think that's the great thing about the 4K movement is it's a way, you know, a bit of a gamification way, if you might, of making people be more intentional about the time that they have left.
Yeah, and it is a sober reminder. One of the things I do I've only just started doing it in some of my keynotes, because again, we can sit and listen to someone and say, I've got 4,000 weeks, but until you know what that means for you. So I get people, and your listeners are welcome to do this. If you get your calculator and you clear it, if you type in 80, because 80 is the average human lifespan, slightly higher here in Australia, but if we just work off 80 as an average, and then you subtract your current chronological age, not your Hollywood age, your actual real age on your birth certificate, then you hit equals, and then you multiply it by 52. That's the number of weeks you've got left. And I get people to take a screenshot. And I have so many people send me messages afterwards. I bumped into someone at the airport recently and they came up and they're like, I had no idea. Like, I've got 1,700, I think it was 68 days left. I need to do something different. And so I think we need to concretize that because, our time is finite and we have to make the most of this one precious life that we've all been gifted.
Wow.
Sorry, that was a bit of a somber tone.
No, that's... No, I so appreciate that. And I know so many people are going to appreciate hearing that too. I mean, the more vulnerable and authentic and raw you can be, the more you're going to connect with people and make other people realise that it's okay that they're going through these things too. And it's interesting that it took you 18 months to talk about your story, because I even think in my own situation, that's kind of been the maturation of time it's taken me before I've been confident, or I guess like accepting or have the clarity that I need around what happened and the awareness to be able to talk about it and talk about it from a place where it's actually going to impact and help other people, as opposed to just be like a victim story, I guess.
Glennon Doyle has a beautiful quote. Have you heard this? No. About sharing from your scars, not your wounds. And I love that, because I think when we're in the trenches, we're in the thick of like a major life transition, major life event. So many, and this is one of the perils, I guess, of social media, is that many people are sharing from the wound. And for some people that works. But I think, as you said, you've got that hindsight, you've got that perspective, you've got the lessons when you can then share from your scar. And that's where I think we can really catalyse change, as opposed to, you know, being in that heightened stress state in the middle of whatever the drama, trauma, major life event is.
Well, thank you again for sharing your story. Sure. I think this actually creates a good segue for me to talk a little bit about mine. And I know we talked a little bit about this off camera before, but I think it's important for me to share this now so that I can get your amazing wisdom and guidance on what to do if you're in this circumstance. But as most people know, my daughter is almost 2 years old. And when I had Ariella, like prior to having Ariella, obviously living a very high powered up, you know, life, entrepreneur, Gold Coast, you know, life of the party, out all the time, having a great time. I went through such a massive identity shift the minute I had my daughter. And we talked about this a little bit earlier about how it often, you know, the anxiety and I guess like the postpartum anxiety and depression that can follow having a child for high achieving women is a real issue, and it's something I had absolutely no idea about. And even when I was suffering from it, I still didn't know what it was. It has literally taken me almost 2 years to really fully comprehend what I've just been through. We discussed this earlier before, because even in terms of like knowing where to go for support, trying to educate your support people around you, your partner, your family, your friends, like how to best support you through it. Like if you don't know what's happening, like how can you ask for help? And for me, I remember waking up some mornings and just being terrified that I'd never go back to feeling like I used to feel. Like I just felt completely powerless. Yep. And very, very scared for the future and very anxious and worried about absolutely everything, because I just felt, and I'd say this to my husband, you know, at the time, like I feel invisible. And for someone who'd always been so visible and so much of my energy and sourced through from that loneliness as well, like deep loneliness. Like obviously so happy to be a mother and so in love with my baby, but man, the isolation, the loneliness, the disconnection, like tough.
Yeah, and I applaud you, because as I said, there are so many high-performing women who experience this, but behind closed doors, they're suffering, but we're not having these open dialogues and conversations. What you described is a phenomenon that's being researched and is getting a lot more attention now, called matrescence. So just like we go through adolescence when we become a teenager and go through that, you know, significant, they're called temporal landmarks, you know, really significant moments in time in our life where life looks different. And obviously adolescence is accompanied with physiological, psychological, social, emotional changes, physical changes. When we go through becoming a mother, that matrescence is also the same, but accompanied with the hormonal changes and the physical changes. There's, I think, for high-performing women, this significant shift in our identity. For years, many high-performing women have attached their identity to their productivity, to their KPIs, to the optics, the success optics that were, you know, and we had a locus of control over that. You know, I could tick things off. I ran my own time. I could feel a sense of accomplishment by how many things I ticked off at the end of the day. Throw in an unpredictable baby, you know, the demands of motherhood. And as you said, I think another thing that's affecting many women in our modern society is loneliness. We are now often together but alone. We're connected, but we're disconnected. And so I think it's the collision of these factors that make motherhood a really challenging transition period. As you said, beautiful, joyful, phenomenal experience for most of us, but also challenging, especially for high-performing women whose whole life is spun on a total different axis of symmetry. Like we feel like we are never the same. We look at ourselves in the mirror and we might physically resemble somewhat of who we used to be, but every other facet of our life has changed instantaneously. And that's profound for anyone, let alone somebody who really lived a very different life before they became a mother.
And so what do we do about it?
What do we do?
I've been on a personal mission to try and expedite this whole experience because it has felt exhausting.
Yeah.
And you know, no matter how many different therapists or coaches I reach out to, or books I read, or content that I consume online, or chats that I have with ChatGPT on the subject, like no matter how hard I try to like speed this up and find a way out of it, it feels like it's something that you just have to surrender to and go through. It's like doing a university degree. It's like it's going to take 3 years, 2. I guess.
does.
Well, I'm not sure how long. It's different for everyone. I read 2 years before the postpartum effects on a body in terms of chemicals, hormones and physical changes go back to normal, and 5 years before you're actually comfortable with your life.
Yeah.
Got another 3 years to go. But then obviously it's like, well, I know some pretty talented, incredible people like yourself out there.
Yeah.
So is there anything that we can be doing to...
I wish I could say there was, a silver bullet. You're not going to like this answer. I think you have to go through it. And can I say, as someone who's been through, I've had 3 children, it is a process and it is a journey, but you reap the rewards if you sit in the muck. Because it's when you sit in the muck, that messy middle, that part where you're uncomfortable, you're discombobulated, you want to climb out. It's when you get to the other side and you have that clarity that it is worth sitting in there. I think the biggest thing is connection. We are our most fundamental psychological need as humans, regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status, is human connection, relational connection. We are hardwired to be with real people in real time. Yes, social media is a great substitute, but it does not produce the same neurochemicals. So, for example, if we had a conversation and we had the identical conversation face to face, and then we compared that conversation and we had it text-based, WhatsApp or SMS or DMs, when we have the text-based communication, our body produces cortisol. When we have the face-to-face conversation like we're doing now, our body produces oxytocin. Oxytocin is the social bonding, it's the love hormone.
Yeah.
So we just cannot, and in an age of digital connection, I do not think, and for women particularly, we know that one of the quickest ways for a woman to regulate her stress response is to be in physical proximity with other people, particularly other females. We cannot underestimate the value, the importance of women in circle, women being connected, women chatting. I recently did a quasi-experiment. A scientist always has to do these things. And I have an informal group of women that we catch up with. It's a mastermind, and we get together where we can and our calendars collide, usually around every 6 weeks. My stress was high and my recovery on my Whoop strap was not particularly great. We had a 2.5, might have been 3-hour catch-up. Lunch, a lot of chatting. My stress score was the lowest it had been in months while I was in that mastermind group. My recovery score the next day was phenomenal. I hit the green zone. My sleep that night, and I couldn't help but think that that was possibly because of that human connection. So I think surrounding yourself, and again, this is where conversations like we're having, you don't have to be a guest on someone's podcast, having real conversations with women and letting the guard down, saying this is hard. I think one of the problems that plague a lot of high-performing women is that we like to put up that facade of, I'm powering on, off I go, I've got it all together. But behind the scenes, it's that duck phenomenon again, where they're, frantically trying to keep up, feeling like they're failing. So I think it's that deep, real human connection.
And I think for me too, it's that high-performing women want to engage and discuss things with other high-performing women as well. Like, I never joined any of the mothers groups because, like, one of the things that I found really daunting going into it was, I know that when I catch up with women, I want to discuss big ideas and psychology and dreams and ambitions and, biz chat, I guess, is my thing. That's what really fires me up. Whereas, some other women, and I mean, each their own, want to get together and gossip and talk about shoes and handbags and rip on their husbands. Like, that's just, it's not me. And it's harder to find people, I guess, like on your level. And that's not coming across as being like up myself or anything like that. It's just literally like, I really value intellectual conversations, particularly when there is an energy exchange or even an exchange of wisdom that helps empower and support and help. When you go away from it and you just feel like you've discovered something new about yourself or you've helped someone, like, it's just so much more meaningful. So it's like, for me, it's like socialization with impact. Like, I choose to do like the podcast and most of the ways that I network, like in terms of my social life now, is like done purposefully for that reason. I'd like to talk a little bit to finish this interview off about the digital side of things and touch on dopamine, but in a bit of a segue to what we were just talking about. So if human connection is really important, what happens when two people are present but on their phones? Does that oxytocin transmit?
No.
And then the two people present but on their phones, doom scrolling, doing whatever. I've read, and I know there's science behind that, depleting dopamine as well. And we're all guilty of it. But particularly, like if you're hanging out and you're on your phones, so you're driving dopamine down and you're not allowing yourself the oxytocin release because the phones are in the way. What's your sort of opinion on that? I mean, it just seems so normal now for us just to do that and not to even think twice about it.
Yeah.
Such a destructive thing.
It is. And it's, again, game become a normalised behaviour. Research estimates, and this will blow you away, I think, that the average Australian adult will spend a whopping 17 years of their entire life on their phones, just their phones. Yes, part of it is because of the way the technology, particularly social media, has been deliberately engineered. It's designed to be distracting and to captivate us. When we are doom scrolling, we enter something that's called the state of insufficiency. We never feel finished. It's a bottomless pit. We keep going. There's always another post you can read, a news channel you can look at, a tab you can open. And so we never feel done. And as humans, we have something called the completion bias. We want to feel, that's why we love scrubbing things off our to-do list.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we're finished. In a digital world, we never feel finished. Now, that wasn't accidental. When tech companies were designing these platforms, that infinite scroll was put in. You know, years ago, you used to have to enable autoplay on YouTube and some of the other streaming services. Now, one episode conveniently rolls into the next. This is why we're doing that revenge bedtime procrastination, you know, binge watching Netflix. So I think there are definitely things that are working against us, you know, working against that human operating system. But this is where we have to put a fortress around our focus. Is it about literally putting our phones somewhere where we can't see them? A study was done from the University of Austin, Texas, and they found that even if our phones were on silent and face down, if they were still in our line of sight, so if we could still see them somewhere, it dropped our performance by 7 to 10%. Put bluntly, just seeing your phone makes you 7 to 10% dumber. It is literally a brain drain. Let alone the impact that it's having on us socially. We know that, again, if a phone is present while we're having a conversation, the quality of the conversation is far inferior, and it is a huge source of distraction. So it's about, again, I call them your digital guardrails. What are some parameters that you can put in place? Because, you know, doing a digital detox isn't the solution. Cancelling Netflix isn't an option. It's all about how can we put some practices in place so that we're not as distracted. Is it putting the phone somewhere where you can't see it? Is it asking your partner to put it away? What's underneath all of this is that basic desire for us to connect. And our kids are seeing it. You know, we talked before we recorded. Digital abandonment. I call it tech-neglect. And they've studied it. You know, children's behaviour changes. There's a clip of a baby in a bouncer and mum is there gooing and garring. Neuroscientists call it ping-pong serve and return interaction. You know, the baby says something and the mother responds. Then she picks up her phone and pops it in front and she's scrolling. Now, one of the things that's not happening then is when a baby, especially when a baby's being fed, it doesn't matter if it's breast or bottle fed, they engage in something called facial mapping. So they are looking at the parent, mother or father, caregiver, feeding them, and they facial map. And really unique regions of the brain are activated when a baby is looking at a face, totally different to when a baby's looking at an object. What we now know is that if a phone is a physical impediment, that child often can't engage in facial mapping. And there was an experiment done years ago before phones, and it was something called the still face experiment. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, I have heard of this one,
Yeah, and so mothers that experience postnatal depression often have a very still face. They don't have the animated response. What they have found is that if a phone is a physical impediment, often it's replicating that still face experiment because they don't get that, you know, backwards and forwards ping pong interaction, and they're often obscured from engaging that facial mapping. So again, it's not to make people feel bad, because as I said, it's really not our fault. The tech companies put out a whole lot of techniques to make it addictive and appealing. The other thing we should know is that it's hard to self-manage because when we are, especially if we're scrolling, say, social media, we are getting a hit of dopamine. Yes, it depletes over time, but it's fun initially, you know, seeing something entertaining or that you relate to. But the problem with dopamine is that dopamine floods part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, and that's our self-regulation center of the brain. What happens instead is that instead of being able to manage that, we can't control it. And so this is why when you take a device off a toddler or a teenager sometimes, you get the techno tantrum because their brain is craving that dopamine and it can't regulate their behaviour.
Wow. And what's the long-term effect of that?
People often ask me, what's the long-term effect? If I'm really honest as a researcher, we are conducting a living experiment. You know, phones are still relatively in the scheme of things in their infancy. We don't yet know what the long-term impact is. So that's why I always go back to, as humans, we have this human operating system. What do we need to function best as humans? It's about saying, how can we integrate technology into our lives, but to do so in a way that's compatible, not in conflict with our HOS.
But we know that, as you said before, it's making people between 7 to 10% dumber.
Yep.
So it's affecting performance.
Yep.
And we do know that if people cook their dopamine, it leads to things like depression, anxiety.
Absolutely.
Like it affects motivation,
Yep.
drive, ambition, like all of the things that we are like.
Well, and to be honest, the mental health aspect, so people, especially with adolescents, we want to point the finger and say it's the phones, it's screen time, it's what's causing poor mental health in young people. There's actually a very limited body of research that proves causation. There's definitely a lot of research that shows correlation. What I think's impacting young people and even adults' mental health is what our time online is displacing. If an adult's spending an average of 17 years of their entire life on their phone, we know teenagers are spending an average of 44 hours a week on their phones alone.
It's more than a full-time job.
It is. Well, it is their full-time job for some of them. That's a huge displacement effect. So what are we not getting enough of? I think the big three that explain the impact on mental health is we're not having the human connection, that face-to-face ping-pong laughing like we're doing now. The next one is sleep. We know many kids, teens and adults are not getting good quality and quantity of sleep.
Yep.
And the third one is movement. We are far more sedentary than we've ever been as a species. When we move, we make dopamine, serotonin, brain-derived nootropic factors, a whole lot of just chemicals that I say do the 2 Fs. They make us feel good and they help us focus. This is also why we're so distracted, because we are not getting the sleep, we're not moving, we're not getting the connection. So it's about really prioritising those really fundamental human needs that we have and not letting screen time erode that as best we can.
Wow. I'm going to finish by unboxing your box because it's also a good segue. It's like my favourite word of the day, segue. So Dr. Kristy has bought me in this box, and on the front here it says, it's not an iPhone, but this box is still worth unboxing.
Well, we hope.
Very clever. Very clever. And so inside we have a copy of your book. And is this available in ebook as well? If people Kindle?
No.
No. Not as
Physical book.
Okay,
Only
so
physical.
we will make sure that we link this in the show notes if people want to get it. So, Dear Digital, we need to talk. A guilt-free guide to taming your tech habits and thriving in a distracted world. Amazing. I can't wait to read that.
Pleasure.
The next thing we have here.
Now you know why. So this is
coming to my lounge room.
Yeah, this is a box, and it's a charge, so you can still charge your device, but it's a little box. So when you want to get your focused work done, and you won't want to be picking up your phone, when you want to be present with your partner or your daughter or your son, a little charging box. Oh, well done.
That's how it's done. Oh, look, it's already playing. Stop it. Okay, so that's my box. My phone is in the box. Digital wellbeing cards.
Yeah, so there's 60 tips. On the front is a little tip, and on the back is the science or the reason behind why you should implement that just little habit.
Wow, that is so cool. A blue light defense hydration face mist.
Yes, because so many of us are spending so much time in front of our screens, and it has a huge impact on our skin and our health. And it smells good too.
I've never ever heard of that before, but that is incredible. And then lastly, we have a little eye mask.
Yes, and a linen eye mask. So research tells us, as we said before, women are not getting the good quality of sleep. If we get even a tiny amount of light coming into our bedrooms, a street light, it has a huge impact on the quality of our sleep. And also for a lot of high-performing women, they often travel a lot.
Yeah.
And we need our brain to make what we call congruent cognitive associations. So regardless of whether I'm in a hotel or my bed at home, if I've got that sleep mask, it primes my brain that I am safe and prepared to go to sleep, and I'm not going to get any of the bright lights that might disrupt my sleep.
I love this because my monitor for Ari is my phone. So every night I go to sleep with this blue light from the phone.
Huge difference
next to my head.
There you go. Now you've got
that's incredible.
That. And the last one, I have to tell you a funny story. It's probably a strange one. It's a cleaning cloth. And I'll tell you why I get these made. I got 5,000. So if you want one. So
you're getting cloth and you're getting cloth and you're getting cloth. I can give them away on my show.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I jumped on a Zoom call, and it was back when everyone was new to Zoom, and the lady didn't realise I'd joined the Zoom meeting, and she realised that her camera was dirty on her laptop. So she lifted up her shirt and gave the camera a really good clean with her T-shirt, and then sat down. And so I was psychologically scarred by a lot of things. I'm sure we all saw really random things on Zoom and Teams calls. But from then I'm like, everybody needs a cleaning cloth nearby because we can never find them. Yeah. So you've got one of those so you don't have to lift your shirt up to clean that.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
This chat is going to just inspire so many women. I really appreciate you coming in. It's absolutely blown my mind in terms of what I thought we would discuss and uncover. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, before we started filming, I wanted this whole theme to be around living in the most powered up versions of ourselves. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Plus more, there is so many takeaways. Like I just think of all of the, tangible outcomes and, tactical tidbits that we can obviously put into the show notes to help people. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Your work is greatly appreciated. Your bravery, your story. I can't wait for more people to meet you.
Delightful. Thank you.
Thanks.